Okay, it is 6 o'clock, so good evening and welcome to the June 22nd Comprehensive Plan Workshop. This is what I believe our it's our 10th in total comprehensive plan workshop, and I believe our 6th virtual one. And Brandon will set us straight on that. And with us is Brandon Mark, and he is the lead process for the city on the comprehensive plan, and he's the division manager of community planning and urban design. Brandon will introduce the others and the staff, as well as if there's any subject matter experts. Additionally, we do have some applicants in the virtual meeting with us, and these are applicants for changes for land use classifications. And if the applicants would keep their videos off and their mics on mute until they're actually going to speak, that would be very helpful. Brandon will also take us through the agenda. And for anyone who's on the line and who plans to make public comment, the phone number for public comment is 929-229-5669, and there is a pass code, and that is 877-147-106#. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrew. He will introduce the staff. We will do a swearing in of staff. And as any of the applicants or any public comment, as you start to talk, if you would introduce yourself, I will swear you in. And if you join in a group, if you would introduce the group, and then we'll do a group swearing in. So I think with that, I'll also do a roll call, and then I'll turn it over to Brandon. Commissioner Burns.
Commissioner Burns is present.
Commissioner Manalis.
Commissioner Manalis present.
Commissioner Strassen.
Commissioner Strassen present.
Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell present.
Okay, terrific. So Brandon, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here this evening. Thank you for volunteering your time through all of this and being available to conduct these hearings virtually. This is the ninth special workshop that the Planning Commission has held. It's the last special workshop that we'll hold. We'll talk about where we go from here as the last agenda item today. With me this evening is Joe Atkins, the Deputy Director for Planning. Gabrielle Collard has graced us with her presence this evening. And Arash Garamani, our urban designer, is here as well.
How about if we do the group swearing in then?
Okay.
At this point, okay? So all of you, and Brandon, if you would raise your right hand. You solemnly swear or affirm that the responses given and statements made in this hearing before the Planning Commission will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth. If so, first say your name and then say I do in the order that Brandon announced you on.
Brandon Mark, I do.
Joe Atkins, I do.
Gabrielle Collard, I do, and the honor is mine, of course. Good evening.
Arash Garamani, I do.
Okay, great. And back to you.
Okay, so on our agenda this evening, I first wanted just to give a very brief background of what is a future land use map, then go into the proposed amendments, and then go over the land use reclassification requests that we received to this point. So starting off, a future land use map is basically the community's vision for how we see the built environment for the next predicted time frame generally. The city typically updates the land use map every 10 years as part of the comprehensive plan, and the vision is for the next 10 to 20 years. We do occasionally go back and amend the land use plan or the land use map as needed throughout time. I believe the last one was 2013 or 2015. But basically, the map is not an exact prediction It's how we view our built environment with the projections of population, housing, and the business climate over the next 10 to 20 years. Just very briefly, a land use map is basically, it makes designations concerning the potential utilization of parcels, where a zoning map is the legal framework, where the legal uses that are permitted are laid out, and what is permitted to be developed there, so your dimensions and your density requirements as such. With that being said, the land use map isn't a policy, it's a guide for policy making. It becomes a responsibility of city staff and the elected officials to implement the future land use map. Traditionally, the city has used the comprehensive plan land use map to make comprehensive rezonings in the past. As we've discussed since January, a major shift in this comprehensive plan process is to go from traditional Euclidean zone, which the city has had since, I believe, the 1930s, to more of a form-based code or form-based zoning. With that being said, one of the recommendations of this process is to maybe not go directly into a comprehensive rezoning based on this future land use map, but take a deeper dive as we move forward as a city and go step by step by using this future land use map to map out where we want to study further through small area plans, use those small area plans to then create overlay districts to use as form-based or other potential overlay districts. I laid out in the summary the steps that we could take to get there, or our proposed steps. In general, by moving forward in this direction, it may look like we're making broad stroke changes in this land use map, but as Gabrielle stated in one of our internal meetings, we're going to have many bites at this apple. So as we move to a small area plan, we're going to get public consensus on a small area plan. We're going to get a lot of input on individual parcels during a small area plan, where the future land use map really looks at this at a high level and makes broad generalizations. As we move through the small area plan map, we can then maybe have key areas where we know we want density, or we know we want this type of land use map, or land use, excuse me, and then move forward to an overlay district or a form-based code that gives your density dimension requirements, your height, your scale of and building mass, etc. So with that said, I will share my screen and show the interactive map that we have and we sent out to everyone. It's also available on our web page. So give me a second here to share it. Okay.
And Brandon, in the meantime, is this the same map that we looked at in one of the very first comprehensive plan sessions?
It is not.
Okay.
It is not. This is the first time we've presented the future land use map. We may have looked at the 2010 land use map or the small area plan land use map.
Thank you.
So as when you were going through this, you may have realized that there's many layers to this interactive map. We also sent PDFs of the 2010 map versus the 2020 map. And then there's a key of all the changes that were made for mostly parcel by parcel through the process. So the first thing you see here is that the existing land use map of 2010 is highlighted here on this map. So if you turn this off, you're going to see our proposed 2020 future land use map here. And one thing you notice is that when you turn off the 2010 map, you're not seeing parcels that are located in the county. We pulled off all future or all designations off the 2020 map. I don't think as staff it's fair for us to speculate for properties that's outside of our jurisdiction and that may or may not want to be involved in the city in the future. With that being said, if we were ever to receive an annexation proposal, it's on the burden of the applicant to let us know what they believe the best and highest use of that property is, and we can consider that at that time. So that's one of the first changes that you'll see. The second change is you'll see that a lot of the non-residential districts, there's 14 total land use classifications in the 2010. A lot of the non-residential designations were removed and replaced with mixed use designations. The residential uses, low density, medium density, and high density, for the most part remain the same. And then there's other land uses in the 2010 plan, the institutional, recreation, private open space, and agriculture holdings. On the 2020 future land use map, we have one employment category, an open space, and then a special district, which is the density enhancement district. So starting with the residential districts, so let me turn these off here. I'll turn off all non-residential districts. So starting with the residential districts, you'll see low density is the yellow, medium is the darker yellow, and then the high density is the orange. So if you turn on the 2010 map, sorry, this might get confusing, but you can see as I click, you can see that for the most part, all these, actually for low density, all remains the same. For medium density, there's some changes where we pulled institutional off, and we'll get into that in just a little bit. So you'll see up here near Homewood, you'll see some medium density residential, or St. John's Catholic Prep. You'll see medium density residential in place of institutional. And then you'll see high density. So there's high density here near Banner School at East and Market, high density where institutional was for Homewood, etc. I'll stop there and just note about the institutional. We pulled institutional off the map mainly because when it was created, I forget, Joe or Gabrielle can chime in a little bit, but when it was created in, I believe, 2005, it was more of a classification of ownership and not land use. So the city permits institutional uses, government facilities, schools, churches, etc., in many zoning districts by right as an overlay district. That institutional zone or institutional overlay district may be applied where appropriate, depending on the applicant or the property owner meeting specific performance standards. As it relates to a future land use map, it isn't appropriate to label these parcels based on ownership, but designate them based on their use. So the biggest one in the city is Fort Detrick. How does Fort Detrick act as a part of our community? Well, it's industrial. It's mixed use. It has housing. It has retail on there. It has office and heavy and light industrial uses. The next is the airport. How does the airport act as a part of our city? It's industrial. It's mixed use. It has residential. It has, or excuse me, not residential, restaurants. It has offices. It has storage, warehouses, etc. So we took the 48 properties that are in the city designated as land use, and we went one by one and just characterized them by their current use. So many institutional, the airport in Fort Detrick, we reclassified them as low industrial, or excuse me, industrial mixed use. Many other categories, such as churches or properties associated with churches, are zoned institutional. And the only way we knew that is by ownership using SDATs, the State Department of Assessment Taxation records, to know that they owned it and it was used as such. So when we looked, you have housing, housing for churches or religious institutions that are houses. They act as residential. You have churches that act as a part of our community for gathering spaces, etc. Then we looked at schools. Schools was the hardest to classify because we're taking a leap in designating them as a future land use because they are a part of our community. It's going to be an extremely rare circumstance where they will not be an institutional zone, where there'll be a different land use. So right now, schools in the city are institutional overlay. They're also the institutional land use. So a lot of the schools we classified as medium or high density residential, understanding the fact that it's going to be an extremely rare circumstance that we will ever have the redevelopment of a public school. And if such, who knows what it's going to be redeveloped at. Our best guess would be high density or medium density residential. It's hard to say. So you'll see that in the land use map where we are familiar with different schools. I think that's about it for the removal of institutional, the institutional land use category. Some other changes that you'll see between the 2010 and 2020 land use map is we no longer put transportation improvements on this land use map because it's not a roadway classification map. So we pulled off the north-south road, we pulled off the connection here and the future interchange at 70 and the interchange that's now built at Jefferson Tech Park. All that was on the 2010 plan, but is not on the 2020 map currently. We also pulled off the PRWSA boundary. The boundary used to be on the map as sort of the tier 2 boundary. You'll also see that tier 3 or future properties of interest are not on here as well. And that is all the changes that we made that weren't designation related. As far as the non-residential uses, the 2010 plan had commercial neighborhood or neighborhood commercial, commercial general, office, mixed use, industrial, residential, and office industrial. We replaced the non-residential uses with 5 mixed use categories. They are community mixed use, and I'll define these here in a bit. Neighborhood mixed use, downtown mixed use, corridor mixed use, and industrial mixed use. We also have a employment area, which is business park. The 2010 map also had other land uses, which were institutional, recreational, private open space, and agriculture holdings. The recreational, I believe it was private baseball fields or other recreational facilities around the city, or open space, city-owned open space as well. Private open space, was the private baseball fields, different privately held areas that were open space. And then agricultural holdings were farms outside of the city's boundary that we anticipated may be annexed in the future. Since we took out properties outside the city's jurisdiction, we removed the agricultural holdings land use categories. Instead, we have open space in the 2020 plan, and then a special district, which is the density enhancement area, which I will go through. All of the land use categories now, or non-residential land use categories now, and broadly summarize the major changes that we made. So the first non-residential, actually I'll go the way it's listed in the chapter. The first non-residential mixed use category is community mixed use. So these are properties that most likely resemble the M1 district. They're either annexed into the city as a mixed use master plan, or they've been considered by the city as a mixed use master plan, or they're parcels large enough to consider as what we now refer to as the mixed use district. So these properties, if they were proposed, would be considered as what we typically refer to as a mixed use master plan, or a master plan for mixed use uses. And for the most part, you've got Summers, VFW, Crum, some major changes in the city where we replaced institutional or our FCC, and so you see this institutional area here. We've got FCC and 2 public FCPS owned properties, and if they were ever redeveloped for some reason, they would most likely be some sort of mixed use redevelopment proposal. You also have a change here. It's 8400 East Patrick Street, which is the driving range. It changed from GC, or general commercial. We changed it to community mixed use. The next major mixed use category is neighborhood mixed use. Actually, I'll go over corridor mixed use first, excuse me, is corridor mixed use. So this category is the Golden Mile, TJ Drive, and Route 26, for obvious reasons. The development around these major corridors in the city may be appropriate for mixed use development in the future. With that being said, each one of these corridors may be redeveloped totally different. The built environment may be totally different, and that's where inching down from the future land use map to small area plans is vitally important, because we may go through a small area plan process for the Golden Mile, and it's going to be completely different from TJ Drive. So when you garner the public input for these small area plans for these corridors, you're going to take bits and pieces of that, gain a consensus, and understand what the future built environment is going to look like, which will help you craft the language for those overlay districts. We did struggle a little bit with 26, mainly because south of 26, it's awkward. We contemplated this area here as potentially industrial, plus you have government facilities that are institutional here, which are the water and sewer treatment plants, or the water treatment plants. So we struggled a little bit here, but wanted to present it as this first draft as corridor mixed use, because you do have a lot of industry or uses up here near Monocacy and 26 that lend itself to that corridor mixed use designation. And if I could back up, corridor mixed use designation is mainly your large retail areas that can that are large enough for an anchor store, or stores that you typically associated with high traffic, etc. The mixed use category does permit many other uses, such as residential, retail, office, etc. This would all be determined during that small area plan and overlay discussion. The next is neighborhood mixed use. The neighborhood mixed use is similar to the corridor mixed use, except you scale down the intensity of uses permitted. So these are going to be smaller parcels in the city located along corridors that do not receive as much traffic and are in buffer between residential uses in the said corridor. So you have Jefferson Street here, you have East or West Patrick Street here, Rosemont up to Yellow Springs Road. You also have 7th Street Shopping Center, Military, and 7th. The shopping center adjacent to Hood College, Trail Avenue, and some uses adjacent to Deerbot and North. Again, these uses, you would, if you were to look at our zoning map today, you would associate these uses with RO, NC, PB, etc. Uses that are going to derive business from the adjacent neighborhoods, buffer the adjacent neighborhoods from the corridor, and provide services to the neighborhoods. The next mixed use category is probably the largest, and that's the downtown mixed use. The downtown mixed use encompasses what we typically refer to as downtown, and I'll compare this with the 2010 land use. So you'll see that it encompasses areas that in the 2010 plan we designated as mixed use, institutional uses, high density residential, and some East Street corridor mixed use areas. Excuse me. So the idea of the downtown mixed use district is really to expand on the built environment of our downtown. So right now we feel like there's pressure building on infill development and maybe adaptive reuse or rehabilitations near downtown that can accommodate that demand. So the idea was for this district to expand up East Street into the East Street plan, and then down to Bricks Works. And the reason for this expansion is we really view it as downtown extended. Redevelopment along this area, we see it being supportive of our downtown, and it's walkable to downtown, and eventually it'll support our downtown. However, there might be some bottled up demand because development in this area east of the HPO will not have to comply with the historic preservation design guidelines. So development in this area may not have be reviewed for height or architectural standards. So you may see this area develop, one, because there's area two where the historic preservation areas, parcels within the HPO are few and far between, and two, there's going to be less review of these parcels and outside of the HPO. The next category is industrial mixed use. So right off the bat, you see that Fort Detrick is industrial mixed use, the airport's industrial mixed use, area up at Riverside, and then SolarX. No, excuse me, I forget. Where the FMP is. Excuse me. You also see industrial mixed use to the east of the downtown mixed use area. So you'll see a lot of large parcels that are currently used as industrial. You'll see parcels on East Street that are industrial. This industrial mixed use area really is our sort of holding place for technology, office, distribution warehouses. But as described in the draft plan, it can also have retail, supportive services, professional businesses, gas stations, etc., all to support that workforce in this area. Residential uses are also permitted in the industrial mixed use area, mainly because it's sort of a buffer between our downtown, the airport, and the business park. So you may see high density residential, medium density residential, live work units that could use the industrial fabric to their advantage. So if you compare the industrial mixed use with the 2010 map, you'll see that it covers a lot of institutional areas, but it also covers mixed use and industrial, light industrial. The next category is business park. And this are areas in the city that are your M2s, your heavy industrial. You have MedImmune or AstraZeneca down here. You have some industrial use near 70, Monoxy, that's Costco. Tilco Drive is business park. And then the businesses to the west of the airport, east and west of the airport, are also business park. This is the placeholder or designation for your heavy industrial, your hopefully data centers or heavy industrial high employment categories. The reason we did not include these areas in the mixed use designation is because we thought it was important to buffer these uses away from mixed use to still retain that high quality employment area, but have it dedicated solely for that. As we move as a city towards form-based code, part of that exercise is to not buffer uses away from each other, but to incorporate all uses together. We do view that when we get in, we do see ourselves when we get into small area planning using this map, where you have industrial, downtown industrial and business park. You see sort of a progression from downtown intensity, high intensity residential, retail, tourist attractions to, you know, your industrial mixed use, your employment centers mixed with residential uses, mixed with retail, etc., buffering into the business park. Obviously, the airport could be a business park land use, but it's a mixed use district. There's a lot of uses on the airport that we felt was more suitable for mixed use rather than business use. The next category is open space. And this is all private and public open spaces within the city. It incorporates HOA spaces, city-owned parks, it incorporates cemeteries and privately owned parcels such as the YMCA. So there's some private baseball fields here. And then the last is a special district, which we talked about in the land use chapter, and that's the density enhancement area. It might be difficult to see here. Let me put the layers under it. Let me turn on the layers under it. It's all downtown mixed use. So the density enhancement area we talked about when we discussed the land use chapter. This area we presented back then and today based on a lot of feedback that there's parcels adjacent to downtown that would redevelop if the density was higher. And at that time we discussed creating a district where there would be no density provisions, or we would increase the density to a point where we felt like it couldn't be achieved maybe. But when we consider this area, even if you allowed any density, there's going to be a lot of other factors that come into play that would regulate itself. There may be traffic issues. There may be private parking issues where we may allow no parking, but the property owner or developer may want private parking. So we feel this is a good proposal to spur development east of downtown and along the East Street corridor. With that, I think that's everything. In the summary, we briefly described the land use designations and what you may see as appropriate zoning that we have today. This isn't all encompassing. It's very broad, and there's a lot of land uses that are permitted in a lot of these zoning categories that would be permitted in all of these districts, but may not be, I guess, described in our current land management code or land use matrix. With that, I think my summary is over, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, we're going to go through the commissioners for questions and comments, and I do see that that 6 of the applicants are on the line too, and this was a rich presentation that you just gave, so I'm also going to ask if there's anybody on the line among them after the commissioners have their questions and comments if they would like. Also, I'm looking at there's nobody else who has called in. So since we're going to take comments from the applicant, I do want to say if there's anybody who's watching that has any comment on this land use map to call in.
Did you want me to go over the, excuse me, I'm sorry for interrupting. Did you want me to go over the land use reclassification request now and take questions?
No,
Okay.
no, I think just the questions, because there were a lot of changes. So I think this was a rich conversation. Can you hold, I think I have this. So the phone number is 929-229-5669, and it's 877-147-106#. Again, if anybody does call in, we will take your comments after the commissioners and after the applicant. So to that, first one, Commissioner Burns.
Commissioner Burns here. First off, Brandon, I'm extremely pleased with all the directions that you and staff and management is going. The removal of the institutional zones, letting that be, I guess, an overlay. Who knows what, an elementary school today, 20 years from now, may be assisted living with the new school built elsewhere. So I think this makes a heck of a lot of sense. An extreme amount of mixed use options creates a lot of flexibility. I have one question and up front, and then I want to go to a couple more comments. When you go into the small area planning, and I like the idea of deferring the zoning changes till then, when we can focus in on, if I understood you correctly, focus in on those small areas as opposed to broad brushing everything. If as part of the small area plan, it's decided that question is the small area plan going to be given that these land use plans are not to change, or will the small area plan be able to update the 10-year plan as part of their process?
That's a great question. And while we're taking questions, I just want to invite Joe, Gabrielle, and Arash to chime in as well if they would like. But I view these designations as almost like major districts in the city, where when we go into the small area planning process, we're going to be looking at it at so much greater detail that it's appropriate to make changes at that time. That small area plan process, you'll get so much more feedback and such a greater level of detail review of those areas. I really see this land use map as mixed with the small area plan map as sort of like a district map. As when you look at this is where we perceive our corridor mixed use. So let's look at that. And this is where low density, high density residential is adjacent to that, and our neighborhood mixed use is located here. There's reasons for that. So let's try to pinpoint that during this process.
Thank you, Brendan. And unless anybody else wants to come in, I think it's a positive direction. Many other counties have small area plans, and Arundel, Montgomery, Prince George's, and that's where all the planning districts, the planning designations and zoning is determined. And in some ways, it seems like a little like Livable Frederick, except it's got more teeth to it, so that you come together with a framework and subject to updates and modifications as you drill down to more details. And I think that makes a heck of a lot of sense. It's going to create a lot more citizen involvement, and it's definitely, I think, the way to plan in this century. So my hat's off to you guys. Just a couple comments. I'd be a little careful about the community mixed use zones, especially when they're along a freeway. As long as we have a very robust and successful highway noise overlay zone, then fine. But you've got to watch the sensitive land uses, parks, residential uses adjacent to freeways, especially when the freeway is up in the air and the land uses are down. I think of the Chesco RV place and the driving range as going that direction, wondering if that might be the wisest for that area. But that's just that's a question. It's not something I want to pursue. The question, well, I guess this is a question. The Mount Phillips, I missed part of the transportation presentation, but the Mount Phillip interchange at I-70, it seems to me that notwithstanding what might occur on the county side of I-70 with possible annexations, by going to low density residential in that area, it would seem to me would be incongruent with the possible future interchange. And if that's the direction that staff wants to go, I'm very supportive of that. If staff wanted to keep the interchange there, then I would suggest something more than like low density, although there's a certain inertia there today with the surrounding neighborhoods as being low density. What else? I really like the density enhancement area along East Street and down into the blending into the transit-oriented development. I think if we want to make East Street attractive to development, I think that's one spectacular way of doing that. And it just seems like or any kind of a situation where you have to redevelop existing properties that already have an industrial base and might take a lot of cost to cure and overwhelm the current uses and perhaps some environmental issues with the land and things like that. So I think that's really exciting. So yeah, I'm very supportive of the direction that staff's going in this whole land use plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Manalis.
Commissioner Manalis, thank you, Brendan. That was a great presentation. You've answered some of my questions already. I think one was about the future land use map and versus the zoning map. I think you've already addressed that. You also addressed going into more discussion around the removal of institutional designations, but I did have a question or a clarifying question about schools. I wasn't sure if I heard you correctly when you said that removal of the institutional designation and replace it with residential high density. Is that what I thought I heard?
So there's many schools throughout the city, right? We went through each parcel by parcel and just in our best guess forecasted if this public or what if some private schools were designated institutional as well in the 2010 plan, but if this institutionally zoned public or private school were ever to change or be redeveloped, what is the most likely scenario given the parcel size, the current structures on the parcel, which may or may not impact in 20 years. But for the most part, the large buildings of schools we perceived as high density or low density residential. If they were developed as condos or, as Commissioner Burns noted, assisted living facilities or whatnot. Now I'm sure there's many other building codes that would come into play as you make those changes. So it's so hard for us to speculate what a existing school would be in the future, if anything. But we did know that we wanted to remove the institutional classification, and the best thing to do was to really forecast as high density or medium density residential.
Okay. And then I may have missed it, but like the federal government, so like for example NIH, some of those that would be considered institutional. Was that change? Are you proposing that be changed to? I think you may have said light industrial. I wasn't sure. Light industrial mixed use. I didn't hear the piece about any of that.
Okay, so right now, Fort Detrick, NIH, etc., is institutional. We recommended this as industrial mixed use based on its current operations, not based on ownership. So its current operation has heavy industrial, has office building, has light industrial, has grocery stores, has residential. There's many uses on Fort Detrick, so we felt like it was most appropriate to reclassify that light industrial. What happens if Fort Detrick would go away? What would this area turn into? It most likely users, light industrial users or mixed use users would come in and occupy this space.
Okay. Thank you. That was it.
Okay, Commissioner Strawson.
Yeah, Commissioner Strawson here. Thank you. Brandon, could you just go back and re-clarify the difference between the industrial mixed use? I think the way that I thought I heard you define is the opposite of what my mind creates when I hear industrial versus business park.
Okay, so I think you're hard to hear there. I think I understood your question as what you describe industrial mixed use versus business park, or business park.
Correct.
Okay,
Yes.
So the industrial mixed use is intended to encompass a lot of uses, from light industrial, what we refer to as light industrial, clean industry, warehouse distribution, etc. But it also allows for supporting services, retail, gas stations, restaurants, and high density or medium density residential or live work units, if applicable. The business park is mainly meant to be your heavy industrial, high truck traffic that may not be appropriate to go through a mixed use area, data centers, large distribution warehouses, and areas that are sort of off the beaten path. So you have AstraZeneca on SolarX, you have Tilco Drive, you have Airport Industrial Center, and then the area to the west of the airport included in that as well.
And will there be residential in business park and other associated uses like grocery stores and those kinds of uses as well, or is that really strictly only heavy industrial?
So that's sort of a double-edged sword. So as described in the comp plan right now, business park is solely for those high intensity employment areas, not permitting residential or your neighborhood associated services. It's meant to be reserved for those high employment uses. As we move towards form-based code, you know, a lot of our recommendations in the future is going to be, okay, all uses are permitted except for these group of uses. So in business park, you may see all these uses except for residential, high density residential, medium density residential, low density residential, and maybe some neighborhood community type of services, daycares, or other low intense neighborhood associated uses, for lack of a better term.
Okay. All right, thanks. Then I did have another question about the density enhancement area.
Yes, ma'am.
And just so can you just kind of explain? I mean, I guess we will know more once we get to the small area plan, but the area that was designated along East Street also seems to me to be an area where we have a lot of industry. And I do remember from earlier workshops where people who have industrial properties on East Street are worried about kind of the residential kicking them out and making, you know, the industry less compatible. So how is that exactly going to work to, you know, keep the uses that are already there and increase residential density?
Gotcha. So this is.
Can you repeat that question or summarize it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'll answer this question in several parts. The first part is what does the density enhancement area do? How is it going to be implemented, and how does it affect current uses in that area now? First, the density enhancement area is basically to incentivize redevelopment, residential redevelopment in the area to the east, or east of downtown, mostly outside of the historic preservation overlay where you can build at greater heights, etc. How it's implemented would most likely not be through a small area plan. This is one of those implementation measures that you could go through a text amendment or zoning map amendment, and this could be something that could be implemented rather quickly through other legislation that wouldn't be a small area plan. How does this affect the current uses? The current uses are located in this area, most of them or all of them by right as industrial uses in the M1 district. This land use map does not change the zoning. It does not affect their current operations. It's a projection or prediction of how we see our city moving forward based on current market conditions, current population trends, business trends, etc. So this will not affect those properties. If anything, it's hard for me to speculate as a planner, but it may make their land more valuable. And the only way for them to relocate is if they made a business decision to relocate their business because maybe property values have increased to a point that it's a private business decision. We are not moving towards a direction to create non-conforming situations for any industrial use in the area. Our sole goal here is really create an atmosphere to encourage redevelopment in that area. And I do not think, I mean, we've seen it go both ways, but in terms of new construction adjacent to other uses, I don't think it'll affect it that much in as a negative externality.
Okay, thank you. That was all the questions I had. Thank you.
Alderman Russell.
I've got some terrible scribbly notes that I'm going to try and interpret into questions here. Circles and arrows. So going back to the question of schools and the sort of default assumption that it would be high or medium residential. What about the possibility of like live work studio area kinds of things? I mean, did we consider that an elementary school or a high school could become a torpedo factory with some living space kind of thing in it? I'm just wondering if that's not, I guess, a question, but to consider the possibility of those kinds of things.
To be frank, we did not consider that. We went through this very rudimentary, where existing operations lended itself to a mixed use designation. That was an easy decision. For schools that are located smack dab in a residential neighborhood, we felt it was most appropriate to designate those as like a strictly residential district and not a mixed use district that we've described in the plan.
Now, I guess to carry that one step further, if we look at them as being potentially higher or medium use residential in smack dab in the middle of all the other residential, that doesn't really promote the concept of having walkable neighborhood, reachable services. So it just creates larger swaths of suburbia. So just that's something to keep in mind.
Okay, understand.
I have a question about height, and you talked about height outside of the historic district not being as restrictive. And I want to make sure that we're going to clarify that residential height, office building height, in or out of there are some height restrictions that may differ in a heavy industrial use than would differ in a commercial corridor kind of a thing. So I just want to make sure that we're mindful and careful about that.
Understand. That was a very broad generalization of me while I was summarizing this, and I could clarify that the density and dimensional standards in the Land Management Code regulate height. The Historic Preservation Guidelines reviews bulk and dimension for all construction or alterations, new construction or additions in the Historic Preservation Overlay. And for the most part, the guidelines recommend that the height and massing be similar of adjacent properties. We all understand how our downtown's built environment is 3, 4, 5, in some instances 6 stories high. Areas outside of the HPO and in the density enhancement area may not be scrutinized as closely as if the redevelopment occurred in the HPO.
Okay, and I'm just going to carry that one step further. And we talked about, previously we talked about conservation districts and preserving character of neighborhoods. And recently, in not too far past, we had a conversation about residential height, roof heights, and what's compatible and what's not compatible. So again, I just think we have to be really mindful of what kind of environment we're talking about when we talk about, taller things or less taller things. And then my last comment at this point anyway was that the Wren Farm you have classified as light or as industrial mixed use.
Yes, ma'am.
What's the industrial part of that? Because my recollection is that was general commercial and residential and some parks, that kind of thing. So I'm wondering why it would rise to the level of having an industrial designation.
So that's a great question. And so sort of described at the beginning of the presentation is that when we made this map, we made it as sort of a broad district. So when you view the industrial mixed use area, you view that as a district. So if you have residential area or residential and commercial uses on one parcel, that's one parcel. This district is to be viewed as many parcels in that area. So where we typically view mixed use districts parcel by parcel, the intent of the plan, the intent of small area plans, the intent of a form-based code is to really look at these communities or districts or designations as a whole and create a more livable, walkable area, or as an industrial mixed use area, more compatible mixed use area in the future.
Okay, I may not be able to lean with you on that particular gigantic parcel, because across is the Schlei, that's clearly industrial. The airport clearly has some industrial stuff. So just something to think about as we move forward. Thank you. I think that's it for now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. I've got an assortment of questions and comments too. I'm going to start with, I do also applaud you for removal of the industrial use. It really brings the consistency to the logic of the map. So that's great.
Madam Chair, you meant institutional, right?
I wrote down institutional. Is that not what I said? Did I say
You said industrial.
Yeah,
We know what you meant.
I looked right at institutional and said industrial. So thank you. On this chart that is underneath the 2010-2020 land use maps, and it goes from 1 to 287. What do those numbers represent?
Good question. Let me pull this up.
I don't think they're parcels. Yeah.
They're not parcels.
Yeah, they're
generally
too large.
So I'm sharing my screen right now. This is the 2010 plan. This is a PDF of the 2020 plan. Each one of those numbers marks an area that was changed. Generally, a group of properties that were commercial general, if they were changed to corridor mixed use, that group of properties, let's say 234, changed. So you could go to 234 here, and I don't know if I'm going to be right or wrong here. 234 was industrial, and it changed to corridor mixed use. And this is one of the areas where I described as we struggled with whether it should be industrial mixed use or corridor mixed use.
Okay, that is helpful then. Thank you. Commissioner Strawson brought up to her, it was not intuitive calling it industrial mixed use and business park. And I absolutely felt the same when you were going through it. So my recommendation would be to call it a business mixed use, because it's more like a business park that can include, it includes commercial uses, and it can include residential, et cetera. And then to call it an industrial park. As you talked about the business park being sort of the heavy industrial, I think when most people, lay folks like us out here, think about a business park, we don't think about the heavy industrial uses. So that is a thought. What is when you look at the density enhancement area in downtown, you talked about the eastern part being, you talked about that. What is the western border? What separates in the downtown core there, the downtown mixed use, what separates the two areas? Like what is the boundary there?
It's a great question. So the boundary is going to be ambiguous. There really isn't a rhyme or reason at it, but I'm going to pull it up here. So let me turn off the layers so we can switch between aerial photography and see if we can see it. It's going to be tough to see. So It encompasses larger parcels that we perceived as having greater, higher impact redevelopment possibilities, potential. And then it follows the first row of parcels, commercial parcels up East Street, and includes shopping centers or major warehouses that could encompass it. For the most part, it's going to be out of the HPO. There are going to be parcels within the HPO.
Okay. Okay. That's what I thought. And when I looked at it, it looked at, because it goes right down the middle of the downtown mixed use, I thought it went further west, and I was just curious on that. So I know I'm collapsing my different maps. So this map never had the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 on it.
It does
correct?
not.
And which map is that has?
So
I know you talked about it in the write-up. They talked about the different tiers, so I was curious as why that's not on this and which map that it is on.
So there was a map in the land use chapter. Man, we discussed it January, I believe.
Yes, exactly.
That had our city boundary, our current city boundary is tier 1, right? And then tier 2 is the PRWSA. So then we expanded it to include the current PRWSA. And then we labeled an area as future annexation area that was just bubble to allow flexibility for annexations in the future. Whereas the 2010 map, land use map, had all 3 tiers on it and delineated the PRWSA and then delineated specific parcels. I'm not sure what the thought was back then, but it designated specific parcels as tier 3. Our goal here is to allow the most flexibility possible by, we already have the PRWSA as a not a constraint, but a calculation to how we can grow in the future. That PRWSA can also be amended. So rather than label the PRWSA, which is an exhibit to a water sewer master plan, we removed it from the land use plan because it doesn't pertain to land use. It pertains to future growth. Then the tier 3, which is annexation, we have a bubble around the city where we're not predicting where annexations may be suitable for the future. We're allowing the property owners and development community to petition us in the future where they perceive or where they speculate development being a priority.
So it was on the land use map and now it's not. And you explained it well as to why not. Okay. That's my questions. Before we go over and ask the land use classification applicants if they have any questions, I'm going to do a quick roll call through the commissioners again, because I know as we have these conversations, it may spur some other questions or comments. So Commissioner Burns.
Commissioner Burns, no further question or comments.
Commissioner Manalis.
Commissioner Manalis, I actually had a question. Just going back to the removal of institutional zones or designations, I was thinking about, and I wasn't sure, I couldn't remember currently what it is noticed as, but hospitals, police departments, fire departments, are those currently designated institutional, and do they remain that way? Or like, that was something that I had questions about.
Great question. So I'm going to share my screen as well. And I'll also go back to the density enhancement area too after I answer this. So a lot of the fire stations or city-owned or county-owned buildings that were institutional, right here is the annex and the courthouse, they're going to be encompassed in the downtown mixed-use area. So many of the churches, fire stations, government-owned facilities are going to be downtown mixed use. When you go up to Hood College and the hospital, that is community mixed use. Again, it's so hard to speculate how these facilities would be redeveloped in the future. That our best bet was to predict that it would be some major mixed use master plan proposal that would just be such a large scale. It's just so hard to predict. So we made this the mixed use master plan, which you see up at Crum or Summers or VFW, where it has to be right now in the land management code, it's required to be, 1585 separation, however that would go. It's really difficult to speculate what that would be in the future. If you have other suggestions, we're open to anything.
Okay. I also wanted to include police departments as well. Does that also fall? I wasn't sure.
So the police departments, let's see here. So the city police department is going to be downtown mixed use, as they are located in several buildings downtown. The county, the sheriff's office, scrolled in too far, is going to be in industrial mixed use.
Really? Huh.
It was captured in the airport.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, that could go both ways. It could go to what we're now referring to as business park. I mean, it could go both ways.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. And while we were discussing, Arash did change. That's how good he is. He did change the key for the density enhancement area, so it's a little easier to see now, and it's opaque, so you can see through.
Ah,
Cool.
excellent. Thank you. Very good. Commissioner Strassen.
So Commissioner Strawson here. I have no further questions for Brandon, but Madam Chair, I want to say that I think you very nicely summarized my concerns about the industrial and business park districts, and I love your suggestion of renaming them business mixed use versus industrial park. That intuitively makes more sense to me, so I second that idea. That's all I have for now.
Thank you. Alderman Russell.
Well, first of all, let me just say that this map and this tool is spectacular. I don't know who did it, whoever did it.
Arash.
It is so fantastic. I mean, it's just amazing. And so thank you for that. So to Commissioner Manalis's question, it seems to me that some of these institutional uses, government buildings, whatever they may be, police, fire, county seat offices or whatever, will just be sort of encompassed in whatever area or district they're sitting in, because it's not going to be called out as an individual, institutional use in the middle of something else. It just becomes all sort of conglomerated into that district. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
So a fire station downtown will have a different land use classification than a fire station up on TJ Drive.
Yes.
But it's not about the fire station.
It's not.
It's
right.
about the area.
That's correct.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, great. That was a good conversation. I don't have any more questions. Looks like no one is called in. So what I want to do is, there's a listing here of the guests who have joined us, and I'm just going to take the names from the top. I'm going to do a roll call. And if you do have something to say, then I will need to swear you in. So let's see how that works. The first one is Andrew DePasquale.
Good evening. I have not been sworn in.
Okay, so Andrew, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the responses given and statements made in this hearing before the Planning Commission will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth? If so, say I do.
I do.
Do you have any comments or questions on this?
I do. I'm hoping it's not premature, but maybe we can knock it out here as opposed to with regard to the individual requests. And I think just from a timing perspective, I thought it was good to interject here because to build off of Alderman Russell's clarifying comment about it's not about the fire station, it's about the area. I have that specific question relative to a couple of my requests regarding the properties owned by Hood College. I certainly understand the removal of the institutional land use that created a tremendous amount of confusion and difficulties over the last several years. But I guess with regard to the piecemeal requests of Hood, best I can make out on these new maps, they are remaining residential, which kind of furthers maybe a little bit of confusion on my part and on the part of Hood College in the sense that they're no doubt being used as part of the college and the institution. So they kind of still end up in an awkward scenario where they are shown on the land use map, these little pieces or parcels as residential, as opposed to the immediately adjacent larger community mixed use. So that's just, I guess I'm looking for a little bit of, and maybe the hypothetical here, Brandon, is what do we do when we have a request, I guess anecdotally, the more recent request that came in for the daycare or the morning daycare program that's operated by Hood.
Sure. So I guess I'll step back first and restate that the properties that are used institutionally you can apply the institutional overlay on those properties without doing a map amendment or rezoning with change or mistake. So any property that meets the performance standards or meets the LMC, you can apply that overlay to, and with institution, it's granted not as burdensome as changing the zoning of many other properties. So I would say that this future land use map doesn't affect Hood College that much because you can apply that overlay to those properties regardless. I don't know the history of those properties. Maybe Joe or Gabrielle could chime in as well. Not sure.
And that's helpful and understood. I guess maybe it's just a more pointed question. Is it? I guess the position of staff at this point that those requests. I mean, we've kind of morphed now. I'll clarify. My request for institutional has necessarily now kind of morphed into, does it make sense, and would staff support designating those as community mixed use? Which, because the existing Hood institutional is now appearing as community mixed use. So could we garner any support? I think more with an eye towards clarity. I'm not aware of any circumstance where Hood has in the past or would in the future take the opportunity to do anything that's inconsistent with the neighborhood. I think they've proven to be good neighbors. I just think we're looking to avoid unnecessary confusion or unnecessary formalities in terms of what it is they want to be doing. So just to simplify, and I guess maybe it might have been more appropriate to wait to the individual request, but would it make sense and would staff support changing those piecemeal requests to community mixed use rather than what was requested as institutional?
I think if I can chime in, Gabrielle at the Planning Department, I think part of the idea of getting rid of the institutional land use on the land use map is in recognition that we recognize that institutional uses can be embedded throughout our community, that they are schools and fire stations and police departments, but that they have special impacts, so we need to evaluate them individually to determine if they're compatible with the community. I think getting rid of it kind of unbiases the mayor and board and the planning commission in its future placement. We're saying, look, we don't want to designate anywhere specifically as institutional because they are going to be throughout our community. They warrant a specific review, but I think in one sense it almost helps Hood College to a certain extent by taking it off so that you can't look and go, well, look, this wasn't shown as institutional, this was shown as residential. Everywhere is a potential institutional candidate. So I don't know that you even really need to align your base zones with that potential opportunity. We want to look at the base zone or the land use map as what we want that area to be in the long term. And so I wouldn't try to align the land use with the land use of another parcel if we don't know that that might be institutional. I don't know that there's a need to do it. That, residential property is equally a candidate for the institutional floating zone as the mixed use section would. That assists in the thought process a little bit. Ron, you have your hand up. Oh,
You're on mute.
Oh, you're muted.
Commissioner Burns, go ahead.
Thank you. It's not unusual for a university or college to, as it expands within its current footprint, to occupy residential houses for small offices, maybe a fraternity row. That's controversial, but different uses. And I'm saying this as a lay person because I don't quite understand how it all works, but maybe that's where the form-based code comes, where with the institutional overlay zone application into a residential neighborhood, so long as the homes stay as homes, as opposed to a 6-story mid-rise dorm being rebuilt where those homes are. It just seems, I would hope that when this is all said and done, that the university has the ability to occupy houses contiguous to their campus as easily and as painless as Andrew is asking and suggesting, as opposed to necessarily going the direction he's recommending. But so Gabrielle, I'm kind of seconding what you're saying. As a planning commissioner, I see that as a normal expansion. And yeah, thanks.
And frankly, we have kind of, even without a form-based format, placement of the institutional floating zone is a conditional rezoning. We can add conditions to that floating zone application. So I think there was one actual institutional floating overlay we did, and I can't remember what site it was, but we attached conditions. It might have been the I'll have to look. It might have been the women's shelter on North Market Street, that there were some conditions about the facility itself. So we do, even now, I think, have protections in place that we could allow for the expansion of the campus in a way that's compatible with the community. But I agree.
So the way this makes sense to me is if you think about it almost the opposite way. If an institutional user, like if Hood College says, I'm going to sell off some of these parcels. Well, when they sell them off, you want it to be and revert back to that underlying land use. So you want to put the underlying land use what it wants to be if that institutional use was not there.
Yeah, exactly. You want to, Fort Detrick is a fun example to think about. Will it ever go away? Who knows? But what would we want that to be?
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think, I think you're spot on in approaching the land use map that way.
Okay. So, Andrew, are you okay if we move on? We can come back.
I am. Thank you. Those are all thoughtful responses, understood. And I just, the only inquiry was, would it make sense to align it with the balance that shows as community mixed use? This all makes sense. I appreciate the responses.
Okay. Next on our list is Bruce Dean. Bruce, do you have any comments? If so, I need to swear you in.
I do. I'll be happy to be sworn in.
Okay. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the responses given in statements made in this hearing before the Planning Commission will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth? If so, say I do.
I do. And first of all, I want to commiserate with Alderman Russell, who commented on the number of squiggly lines she has written going from one page to another, because I'm suffering from the same spider web on my comp plan here. I also want to apologize. I did not realize until very recently the significant amount of changes that were going on as part of the land use map and the land use classifications. And I was talking to Chris Smoriga about this, and I'm sure he can jump in, but we thought this was going to be a fairly minor update to the comprehensive plan, but it now looks like we're getting rid of all of our commercial and industrial designations and adding in these 5 new MU designations. We're also adding a density enhancement overlay area, and it appears that there's 287 properties that are being affected by these changes. And I'm not sure that there's been, at least in the development community, a lot of engagement on the sort of depth and breadth of those changes. With that said, I don't necessarily disagree generally with them. I'm going to have some specific comments on one of my clients who's an applicant. Unlike Andrew, I'm not going to use this general time to dig into my personal client's matter, but that was a joke, Andrew. It's fine. But these are some significant changes, and while I get the fact that they don't necessarily affect the immediate use of these properties, they will affect potentially the future development of them. And so my only comment is one, that I think that the people who are affected by these need to understand what they are. And number two, if we are going to go to having 5 MU categories, it is incumbent on the city of Frederick to update its land management code and change the MU district now. If you're going to have 5 different MU property categories, I think you're going to need to have a whole new land management code section as it applies to the mixed use category. So with that, those are my comments for now.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. Next on the list is Chris Smoriga. Am I saying your last name right, Chris? Anyway.
It was butchered, but that's fine.
I'm sorry.
It's Smoriga, actually, just like it's spelled, which was spelled incorrectly when we came to this country. So it keeps getting worse.
No, I can look at it and I see that I, and I didn't say it. So
Got it.
I will either not say it in the future or attempt to say it right. Okay. Do you have any comments? Do you want to be sworn in?
I was not sworn in. Do I need to now, I guess?
Yes, if you have comments. Okay. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the responses given in statements made in this hearing before the Planning Commission will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth? If so, say I do.
I do. Thank you. Following up on what Bruce said a little bit, and Commissioner Burns mentioned it when he talked about some of the potential mixed-use categories, like on I-70, and whether that should be community mixed use or whatever, what have you. Maybe I guess in my simple mind, I kept thinking mixed use is mixed use. I mean, when we've implemented it on projects today, it's had such flexibility to it that I feel like it could be that today's mixed use a lot of these properties could fall into community mixed use or neighborhood or downtown. So I think there'd be a lot of overlap between those districts. I like the idea. I mean, it's an interesting way to think about it. But at the end of the day, if we're going to move towards more form-based, it just makes me wonder whether we need all these categories or whether the community you're in, whether it's the Jefferson Street community or we talked about, I guess, on West Patrick Street, some of the more commercial or heavier industrial areas like around AstraZeneca. I mean, in my mind, all of it, whatever property you're in, I mean, there's a community around you. So in my mind, community mixed use could almost apply to any of these. It's really, I think, how it gets implemented. So as Bruce said, I guess I didn't know so many categories were going to pop up. That's fine. I just think we need to vet them, go through and make sure we understand. Because as Bruce mentioned, we have a lot of people are interested in the mixed use parcels. And so, logically, moving into the LMC or making some other possible changes, we may just have to look at it sooner than later, which is fine. We've always been advocates for making the ordinance better, or the code better as we go. So that's it for right now. Thank you.
Okay, Chris, thank you. Next one I see on the list is Kevin Slagle.
Hey.
Kevin, do you have comments?
Can you see me and hear me? Yeah, I do.
Okay. Can you raise your right hand?
I can.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that this response is given in statements made in this hearing before the Planning Commission will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth? If so, say I do.
I do.
Floor's.
Okay. First off, I want to just say I'm super impressed. Ton of work. I agree with Kelly. The interactive map is amazing. It really takes Frederick and shows just how complex and the layer analogy is good, because there's just a whole bunch of different ways that you can look at it. I guess my main question, and I, like everybody else, has been writing down a ton of notes, is the next 10 years being looked at in terms of how we want to align ourselves with the changes that have been happening in the last 10 years in terms of like what community needs are, and in terms of how historic business paradigms are changing, and some aren't working and some are exclusive, and some are frankly just bad. And it's not lost on me. This is the first, I don't know if it's the first time, but that we have an all Democratic group of aldermen in Frederick. So there's a little lean towards the left. I've had a lot of discussions about this, but I guess I'm wondering if thoughts are there regarding things like inclusionary zoning, where it sort of mandates that affordable housing or cost housing be included in projects. Just as I was thinking about that, and thinking of some of the problems, it's been my understanding that a lot of the large business parks and traditional large-scale commercial type zonings are kind of becoming slightly dinosaurs, and a lot of them are sitting empty, and it's difficult to rent them as they are. And could they not be sort of repurposed from a planning standpoint to address different ways that small scale businesses might need to group together and do shared community things to change the dynamic of the haves versus the have-nots and opportunities? I was kind of just thinking of this all theoretically until my old buddy Bruce and Chris got on and seemed pretty animated about, I'd never actually heard this term, the development community. That said a lot to me. And a lot of it, what seemed like concern about the concept of mixed use. And I'm trying to wrap my head around why it seems like it's almost a threat to the development community. And all I can say is that it seems to me that Frederick for the last 30 years has been kind of at the mercy of the development community, and it's all been a certain type of development, and it's all been a for-profit entity, and it's been about sprawl and growth. And now it doesn't seem like that's the spirit anymore. And it seems like there's a lot of people, Frederick's heart is, I think summed up in this Black Lives Matter march the other day where I can't believe what a progressive town I live in. It was just everybody coming out to support a truth that everybody just got behind. And for the 2 years almost 3 years that I've been back and lived here, that's what I've seen, is this desire to move Frederick towards something else, despite all of the obstacles that historically have prevented it from happening. And I guess my hope is that we can take, whatever time it takes to get this stuff passed, to have conversations about, how could we designate areas like the Wren Farm came up for large swaths of affordable housing, and then how do you incentivize it, and how do you find the developers that are interested in doing that, find the grant money that's interested in doing that? How do we come up with the concept of the 5-minute neighborhood, which is something we had in Portland, where it's not about the city being lumped into different zones, the business zone, shopping zone, living zone, but having all the amenities as close to where people live, and it makes it a more livable thing. I mean, all stuff I've heard everybody talk about, but I don't know. I just think this is a chance to get really radical and to just sort of question who we are as Frederick, and look for little cracks in the system that might make major changes for people that are struggling to find opportunities because they're bumping up just the most simple, basic laws that favor people who have enough money to obey the laws, and enough power to sort of like ask for the variations when they need to make it work for them. But small business owners, people that can't afford housing, there's no product for them. And I think if we don't address this, it's not going to happen, because we're the perfect model for it. So that's all I got. And thank you guys again for being so awesome. You're doing an awesome job.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. The next on the list is Noel Milano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No comments at this time. I'll wait till the individual property requests. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Noel. And then Richard Cody.
No comments. Thank you very much. Out.
Okay. All right. Well, there are no other calls in, so I'm going to do a quick roll call of the commissioners just to see if there's any last comments or questions before we go on to the next agenda item. Commissioner Burns.
Commissioner Burns, nothing.
Commissioner Manalis.
Commissioner Manalis, nothing, thank you.
Commissioner Strawson.
Commissioner Strassing, I have nothing further, thank you.
And Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell, I do have a process question, and it came up, just raising the point that there are so many individual properties who may be affected by the zoning change. And I do recall when we did the 2010 plan that the city sent out mailed notifications to property owners whose property may be affected. There was also a notification to some who said, don't worry, it's not going to be affected, but it was. So what proactive steps have we taken to reach out to the property owners who may be interested in looking at this and coming and testifying about their properties and their thoughts?
That's a great point. And to date, this is the very first draft of the future land use map that has been presented. To project forward, there will be many times to review this. To answer your question, we have not mailed individual owners. This is my first time rewriting a comprehensive plan, so I'm not familiar with what we've done in the past. Perhaps Joe could chime in with that. But there will be many opportunities to review this and submit comment as we move forward to the mayor and board.
Yeah, this is Joe Adkins. When we did the 2005 comprehensive rezoning, we did mail out a postcard size mailing to all properties because the nomenclature changed for all the properties in the city. pardon me, in the city. So whether, your R3 went to R6, the nomenclature changed for every property. In the 2010 comprehensive plan, we did not mail out a notification of change of land use categories. I guess we could do that to all the properties again to put them on notice, because I would think the vast majority of the properties in the corridors and the industrial areas probably would have a change in land use classifications. Some of the residentials probably would not. So we could look at that. I don't think the cost was that prohibitive. And also, just to get back to a basic fundamental here, when we talk about, and I'm going to pick on East Street, but when we talk about East Street and the East Street corridor, and it's a type of mixed use, that mixed use is really going to be defined by the small area plan. And that small area plan is really going to dictate the zoning, the way the buildings look. It's going to prohibit certain types of uses. It might allow different types of uses. So just because you have two corridor land use classifications, one on East Street and one on, Golden Mile, wherever it is, they're not going to look the same. They're not going to act the same. So trying to rewrite the zoning code right now to address all the different types of mixed use, I think would be a major mistake. I think they're all really dependent upon the small use plan or the small area plans.
Thanks, Joe, for that point. But just back to the chart, there were 287 proposed changes. At the very least, I think we have an obligation to reach out and touch those folks.
We can do that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so Brandon, have we just covered both what is a future land use map and the proposed land use map amendments, right?
We have, yes.
Okay, so that takes us to the land use reclassification request, right?
Yes, ma'am. And I will share my screen here. Bear with me. Okay, so as I touched on at the beginning of this presentation, we received, well, let me step back. When we started the comprehensive plan update process, one of the first things we did was follow our traditional procedures. Traditionally, we adopt a comprehensive plan. We may amend the land use map, and then we may do a comprehensive rezoning to match the land use with the current options of zoning that we have. When we started this process, we're like, okay, well, let's reach out to the community and see if there's a response to property owners to see if they have interest in changing their land use that would set up potential redevelopment in the future, or it would make their land use more compatible to their current operations or the neighborhood, or what may have been a mistake in the past or a change that has occurred. Part of this process is to really allow the change of land use and eventually the change of zoning without going through the state legal tests, which are a change and mistake that you can do with a comprehensive rezoning. As we started drafting this plan and moving forward, mainly based on the 2030 community strategic plan, which has initiatives in there to move towards form-based code and other initiatives, that when you really start peeling the onion back and looking at the traditional process, comprehensive plan process and comprehensive rezoning process, it didn't make much sense. So we solicited feedback from the community on potential land use reclassifications. We received 19. With that being said, we talked to Mr. DePasquale, who represents Hood College. 6 of them were a change from residential uses to industrial uses, which we touched on. Some of them were, I'd say, notice from properties outside our municipal boundary that they're interested in being annexed into the city under a mixed use or a future use. And during this process, we didn't consider those properties, as I explained earlier, that are outside the city's jurisdiction. So when you peel back those two categories, we received 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 requests that enabled us to review and make sense with all the initiatives that were taking place in this comprehensive plan process. And I'll just go through. We'll start at number 7, 7801 Biggsford Road, which is Thatcher Farm. Michael Natelli was the property owner representative here, and the land use at the time in the 2010 plan was mixed use. It was zoned MO as part of an annexation proposal, and they requested mixed use as the future land use. I will scroll in to see if this shares. Do you guys see this map? Or excuse me, sorry, that's the wrong map. So let me change my screen here. So the Thatcher Farm is here. Its previous land use classification was mixed use. We proposed it as community mixed use. I believe that meets the intent of the applicant's request, and we believe it makes sense to change the land use classification for this property. The next, excuse me, sorry. I'll go through these. The next request was Mr. Dean representing Food Pro. At its existing land use in the 2010 map was mixed use. Its current zoning's industrial. The current or the proposed land use was industrial. We felt that it made most sense in classifying that as downtown mixed use, mainly because of many initiatives that have occurred recently, the East Street Corridor Plan, this comp plan, and understanding that this land use classification does not change the current zoning of that property, and they are permitted to operate by right, and it's not creating a non-conforming situation. Barbara, did you want me to run through all these, or do we want to discuss them one at a time?
Well, I think it makes sense to discuss them one at a time, or else we're going to have to go back and we will be talking about them one at a time. But I have a quick question. I think I got this. So the proposed land use is what the applicant is asking for, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So that means, Mr. Dean, do you have any comments on this?
Hold on. So I just wanted to quick, go ahead.
Sorry, I apologize. So what I think we should do is, after, similar to a hearing, we'll hear from staff first, we'll hear from the applicant first, and then we'll take comments and questions from the commissioners. Okay, excuse me. Go ahead, Bruce.
Okay, I just wanted to briefly mention that even though Michael Natelli is not on this call, that I did work with him on the Biggsford Road application for the Thatcher Farm. And I would agree with Brandon that the community mixed use does meet the request that Natelli Communities had put in their application. And then regarding the Food Pro application, I agree with everything Brandon just said. My only concern is, and I think Commissioner Strawson mentioned this a while back, but when you look at the different, the 5 different MU categories, the downtown mixed use does not include industrial in its list of non-residential uses that are, I don't want to say permitted because it's not a zoning classification, it's just a land use map, but it does say non-residential uses may include office, employment, retail, and restaurants. And it was made very clear, and Joe alluded to this in the East Street Corridor Plan, that the thriving and ability of the existing industrial uses on East Street was a major component of the East Street Corridor Plan. And if we're going to designate the East Street Corridor as downtown mixed use and not as industrial mixed use, then I would at least like it to have some reference to what the East Street Corridor Small Area Plan, which has already been adopted, it is already the policy of the city, have that somehow incorporated into downtown mixed use. It may not be true on all of downtown, but certainly on the East Street Corridor, the property owners there were very adamant, and my client Food Pro is just one of them, that they wanted to be welcomed there and they wanted to be able to thrive and enhance their businesses there. And it's a bit disconcerting to me to have them. I'm not going to just say, yeah, it's okay, put them as downtown mixed use when downtown mixed use doesn't even mention industrial, whereas the East Street Corridor Plan does. So that's my comment as to my client's application. I do think if you're going to make it downtown mixed use, then you need to at least say, we're not going to try to drive these people out of business. So that's my comment.
Okay, and thank you, Bruce. So Brandon, actually, let's take comments and questions from the commissioners. Commissioner Burns.
No comment, Commissioner
Burns. Commissioner Manalis.
Commissioner Manalis, no comments.
Commissioner Strawson.
Commissioner Strawson here. I have no comments.
Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell, I do think Mr. Dean made some very poignant comments about how we want to preserve and keep thriving what's there. So we do need to look at that. Thanks.
Yeah, and I would agree with that too. It just makes sense. So to look at that. All right, the next one, Brandon.
Did you, for the benefit of Mr. DePasquale, did you want to make sure that there's no further discussions? I sort of skipped over 1 through 6, which is Hood College and the institutional.
Okay. So first we'll go back to Andrew and see what else, Andrew, you would like to say on this, and then we'll have comments, questions from the commissioners.
I appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate the indulgence earlier, so I'm not going to take any more time. I still, I'll just offer, I would prefer to have consistency. I understand the points that were made, but clearly the balance of the campus is shown as community mixed use. I think the points that I made earlier in the process relative to the institutional request were that in all of the requested instances, we're talking about a single family residence. So there's no opportunity that that's ever going to look or act differently from a form-based perspective. So just from a mapping consistency perspective, that would still be my preference, but that's all I'll say. Again, thanks for your earlier indulgence, and my apologies to Bruce as well.
Okay. Let's do a roll call. Commissioner Burns.
No comment, thanks.
Commissioner Manalis.
Commissioner Manalis, no comment. Okay.
Commissioner Strawson.
Commissioner Strawson, no comments.
Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell, I really do support staff's position on this. That area there is a very strong, established neighborhood area, and to me that has to take precedence And it has to live in, the college has to live in concert with that neighborhood area that we've worked so hard to preserve. Thanks.
And my comment is that I really don't see that the goal here is to have consistency in the underlying zoning. Once there's an institutional overlay on it, it allows that institution to treat its property in the way it needs to treat it. But going back to my other comment, if they were to sell some of the parcels off, then you would want it to be the correct underlying zoning. So, so I support what the staff has done also. Okay, we're on to the next one then.
Okay. So the next one is number 9, Mount Phillip Road Grove Joint Venture. This proposal was for us to consider, or I believe when it was first presented in January, put it on the city's radar that these folks, most of these annexation proposals were interested in pursuing annexation with the city in the future. So like we said multiple times this evening, the city, our staff's perspective here is to not include properties outside the city's jurisdiction. It will be on the burden of the applicant at the time they petition for annexation to prove that the annexation is valuable at that time with an appropriate zoning or land use. So the Mount Phillip Road Grove Joint Venture, it's now Frederick County, it's in agriculture. The proposal was mixed use. We didn't consider this proposal. This annexation is right here, number 9, Mount Phillip Road in the salmon color.
How about if you also talk about 10, and then we'll open it up to Bruce for any of his comments on both of these then.
Very well. So number 10 is Yellow Springs Road. This is Frederick County. It's currently zoned RC and R1 in the county. The proposal was for low density residential. Again, we didn't consider this. Let's see, this is number 10 is right here in the four parcels yellow. They're yellow.
Okay, Bruce, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I'll just be really brief. Actually, Brandon, I'm going to give credit where it's due. He met with representatives from the Land Use Council very, very early on when he was meeting with stakeholders. And we actually suggested that he consider the livable Frederick method of using concentric circles just to show areas that the city would consider rather than being property specific, just as maybe a way of expressing the city's interest in expanding, but without trying to pick and choose winners and losers depending on whether they happen to hire a very outstanding land use attorney or not. And so we thought that doing it the way Brandon did it was actually the right way to go. And so for my clients who are immediately adjacent to the city, they're within those bubbles. And so I think it's perfectly fine what staff is proposing. And we're happy just to keep going. I will say though that having read the land use chapter again this afternoon as proposed, I have some continuing significant disagreements with how staff is proposing to look at annexations in the future, but I will leave that for another discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Let's do a roll call on this. Commissioner Burns.
Nothing to add, thank you.
Commissioner Manalis.
Commissioner Manalis, no comments.
Commissioner Strassen.
Commissioner Strassen, I have no comments.
Alderman Russell.
Nothing at this time, thank you.
And the same for me.
Okay, the next property is 11, 3M Farm LLC. This is the driving range. So this was current land use is general commercial, current zoning is general commercial, the proposed land use is mixed use. Staff proposed this as community mixed use. We did have some discussion about this earlier in the conversation, but let me pull up the map here. So this is community mixed use in the Salmon. The existing use is general commercial.
Okay, Chris, any comments?
Again, I'll just be real brief. It's an interesting piece of property. It has a lot of visibility, not the greatest access necessarily. It's also, in a unique southeast location here in the city where, you're transitioning into more suburban parts of the county. The thought of general commercial back at the time was to be some type of retail strip center. We looked at several of those concepts, but clearly that world has changed a lot. And there's a lot of neat features like access, I mentioned, to the river. There's a bluff that overlooks it. One of the annexation conditions was to provide access, whether be it through a public park or what have you, down to the river. So there's some really neat opportunities just to relook at this as a community mixed use and come up with something, a little bit different, something unique that takes advantage of the different site features. So don't know what that is yet, but it's something. It'll be coming.
So Chris, it sounds like you are supportive of the recommendation then?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Let's do a quick roll call. Commissioner Burns.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Across Old National Pike is residential for the most part. There is the large congregate care, and then I-70 forms a giant barrier between that and the industrial uses to the north. So this seems like a nice opportunity as a transitionary use. As Chris said, it's got a lot of good access, but yeah, I think it's all good. Thank you.
Commissioner Manelis.
Commissioner Manelis, no comment.
Commissioner Strawson.
Commissioner Strawson, I have no comments.
Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell, that looks good.
Thank you.
All right. So Brandon, how about if you take the next two, because it's with the same applicant together.
400 Linden Avenue is a separate applicant.
Oh, no, sorry. I was jumping ahead to 13 and 14, so I do apologize. Number 12.
No problem. So the applicant is Richard Cody, who is on the call with us here. This is the clustered Spire Cemetery on Linden Avenue. Its land use was institutional. Its zoning was institutional. The proposed land use was institutional in R6. As we discussed previously in the conversation, we designated cemeteries as open space. In this instance, it did make sense to classify a portion of this property as low density residential, and I will change my screen right now to show that. Where are we at? Let me turn all this off. There we are. So this is the cemetery. This portion of the cemetery is not encumbered by gravestones or anything like that. So you'll see low density residential here and open space there.
Okay. And that's it for your presentation. Richard Cody, any comments? Let's see if Richard's still with us. I don't see him.
I don't either.
Okay. Let's get comments from the commissioners then. Commissioner Burns.
Just thinking. So it's going from institutional to, they're requesting for institutional in R6, and that's going to now be an overlay zone. No comment, thanks.
Commissioner Manalis,
Commissioner Manals, no comment.
Commissioner Strawson.
Commissioner Strawson, it seems like what the city is proposing is consistent with what they asked for, so that's all I have to say.
Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell, just with a question about open space. What would, we were talking about reimagining things, you know, Fort Detrick becoming something else. What would happen in the instance that the cemetery itself would cease to operate that way and its land use is designated open space? Just help me envision that. Would it have to be continue to be open space, or?
That's a good question. It's hard for me to envision a cemetery anything other than a cemetery, mainly because my ignorance as to what happens to cemeteries in the future, I have no idea. I would assume they're always a cemetery. And then I guess if you step back, and I guess looking at it selfishly, I did not want to propose anything other than open space on cemeteries as well.
No, and that makes sense, but I guess I will just say that, you know, the city of Frederick actually has had a history of, unfortunately, relocating African American cemeteries and putting a hospital on it, or, you know, we have Laboring Sons Memorial Grounds now where some inappropriate things happen. So, you know, we're looking at, you know, Mount Olivet is looking at a portion of their property. So I think we need to contemplate what might happen if it were to become something else. I don't know what that looks like at this point. I think the open space is fine for now, but I just think as we really have to be forward thinking in understanding that things that are long-term institutions don't always stay that way, for better or for worse.
Understand. You're on mute.
I said, I don't have any questions. I agree with the recommendation from the staff, and I think the comments from Alderman Russell were very, very good. So now I say, how about if you take the next two together?
Yes, ma'am. Pull this up. So the next two, 198 Monroe Avenue. Its current land use is office. Its current zoning is M1. The proposed land use was mixed use. We proposed this as industrial mixed use. The second is 800 Oak Street. Its current land use is office. Current zoning's PB. Requested land use was mixed use. We recommended designating this community mixed use. And I will scroll into Monroe Avenue first. So existing use. And then you see industrial mixed use, excuse me.
What is it there currently?
I'm sorry?
What is that property? I'm just trying to envision it. Is that the FCC property?
No, it's I believe Mr. Sills' property.
I was going to say, can you circle?
Yep, it's this property right here.
Okay.
So here's the fairgrounds. Here's PNC at Monocacy and East Patrick. believe that's PNC. It's this property.
And can you go back to the original now that we know the shape of that, exactly where it is on the page?
So it's here.
It's right there. Okay.
And then where are we at? There.
Right there. Okay.
Yep. So
All right. So Noel, what are your thoughts on this?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You haven't sworn me in yet, so I'll go ahead.
Oh, that's right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Gosh darn it. It's right here. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the responses given and statements made in this hearing before the Planning Commission will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth? If so, say I do.
I do. Thank you again for the opportunity. Appreciate Brandon's request. We obviously are supportive of the request and the recommendation, and would hope you would support the same. This with the comment I'll have would be both applicable to this and to the next case. Obviously, we're going from a mixed use land use currently, as it currently exists in the comprehensive plan, to one that's broken out into these different types of mixed use. And we're learning as we go along as to what the implications of those are. I think there was some good discussion earlier on in the meeting about how this land use plan will ultimately lead into small area plans, which will look at a more parcel by parcel level as to what is intended for each of these properties. As it stands, when we do these land use changes, are you to pass these, we'll still have in the land management code just the MU1 and MU2 regulations to apply to any specific plan. So this goes to a point Mr. Dean made earlier on. I think a lot of the property owners that are interested in mixed use, and quite frankly, you all as well, will want to see how the aspirational designation on the comp plan of mixed use will translate into what that will actually look like once plans come forward, be they changes that you and the alderman might make to the land management code, or be they arising in the process of the small area plan. So essentially what I would reiterate is that while we're definitely supportive of these designations, we'll certainly also be interested to see how you all and the alderman and staff envision the, I guess, nuts and bolts, if you will, of putting mixed use into place. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to do a roll call of the commissioners. Commissioner Burns.
Sounds like we have consensus. Thanks.
Commissioner Manalis.
No comment.
Commissioner Strassen.
Commissioner Strassen, I have no comments.
Alderman Russell.
No comments, thank you.
And I'm good too. So Brandon, then you want to take the next three?
Did you want me to scroll over to Oak Avenue, which is just to show it, or?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yep.
Of course.
So
We jumped ahead there.
Oak Avenue is majority of this purple parcel here. We did propose community mixed use here. This is adjacent to US 15, adjacent to Dutch's Daughter restaurant, just for reference.
Okay, thank you. So on to the next tranche.
Oh, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, might I address one point on that one, if I might?
Yes.
This of course, is the United Healthcare, formerly State Farm property. And I would just reiterate a point we made earlier on in the process, that as you're considering these small area plans, to the extent that it would make sense to consider this as part of a look at the Golden Mile small area, we would state on the record that we'd be certainly interested in that as well, relative to exploring what you're doing out there for the Golden Mile proper.
Okay. So before we go on, I'm just going to see if this works, but does anybody have any of the commissioners have any further comment on this one before we move on?
I actually do. This is Commissioner Burns.
Yeah.
I don't recall in the transportation plan whether or not we're showing a local connection between Himes and Linden or Locust through this property. Brandon, do you recall?
I don't recall that as either. I can look into it. Would your preference be to show a connection through here?
Well, yes, it would be my personal preference looking at this from above that redundancy, number one, is a good thing. By having a land use such as this as almost like a dead end system is not a good thing. I recall there was some rezoning requests that we actually recommended denial, and I think the mayor and board in this neighborhood, and the mayor and board upheld that, I believe, because it was the end of a dead end system and the roads weren't very good. So I do understand that some people who live in the Himes Road Avenue corridor may not like it. So it's truly a community thing, and I think it's truly something that a small area plan would look into. But some of these small area plans may not get going until years 7, 8, or 9 years into the future. So if that's not in the master plan, I would at least propose that as a local street connector through this property be shown down to Himes for the reasons I stated, and then at least it can get some public input if it's not very popular. But I think from a planning perspective, it's a good thing.
So are there any other commissioner comments?
Alderman
Okay.
Russell. Yeah, I'll just jump in and say that there is, on private property, that connection does exist. The United Healthcare, I believe, gates that off, or has gated off, or has opened it in the past. Then there has been some neighborhood tension as regards that connection. So it's something that I think would need to be really vetted through those two neighborhoods that would be connected, the Linden Hills area and the Himes Avenue area.
All right. So any more commissioner comments? If not, we can go on to the next tranche.
Okay. Share my screen here. So the next 3 are all properties outside the city's current boundary. The Winpenny Drive property is currently in the county as R1 and Ag. For the lack of something better, I put the proposed land use as Tier 1 because the proposal was to locate within the city's boundary through annexation. Sundays Lane is current zoning is Frederick County Ag. I did the same, or put it as Tier 1, and 6900 Linganore Road is again Frederick County Ag, and I put it in this request as Tier 1. You can see these properties here. Number 15 in orange is the Winpenny property. 16 is Sundays Lane. This is just north of the Crum property. And then 17 is 6900 Linganore Road, and that's to the east of the city.
Okay, thank you. Noel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, as Mr. Mark described earlier, when we started the process, it was more of what we would consider the traditional comprehensive plan process, whereby there was comment taken on anything shown on the comprehensive plan. And obviously, again, the potential annexation areas are something that are shown on the current plan. So therefore, we put in requests on behalf of property owners that would like to be included. I think Mr. Dean mentioned earlier, there are obviously, I think at this point now, clearly you're not going to be making land use designations, but certainly I would, on behalf of these 3 particular projects or clients, have comments on the, I guess it would be the municipal growth draft chapter of your comprehensive plan. So while these requests are coming up now, I guess I do have comments relative to, again, things that Mr. Dean alluded to as to how the comprehensive plan is describing tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and the criteria. I think that a key with annexations are there's really three things. You want to have, I guess, good data, and this speaks to a lot of what is described as the pipeline and also the Potomac River Water Supply Agreement. So you want to make sure you have good data going into those considerations. And then you want to look at, I guess, timing. So you don't want to have, in what we've seen through the years, you can't really ever anticipate what the market or any particular, I guess, need would be. And, you know, there was a situation, and I'm thinking of a past client in particular, Homewood, where we needed to come into the city based on a severe need for that type of project. And because of timing, we had long waiting lists, and unfortunately, well, fortunately, we got through the process, but unfortunately, it took much longer than we could to meet that demand for the city. So timing, and then related to timing, flexibility. Again, when you're looking at your municipal growth chapter of your comprehensive plan, I would urge you to bear in mind that you'd want to err on the side of flexibility. And I do obviously compliment Mr. Marks and staff for moving towards this more, I guess, area of interest as opposed to the set rigid tiers. But once you start getting into the details on the tiers and sort of what the city, as articulated in the comprehensive plan, is looking at to prioritize tier 1 and tier 2, I would just say, and again, I'm taking the opportunity now because of these specific requests, but you know, a lot of the pipeline projects shown in tier 1 and even in tier 2 have been there for many, many years. And I was looking through some, I mean, some even predate the iPhone. So you need to make sure if you're predicating decisions on growth for the city and meeting needs for the city, that the data be accurate. So those are my general comments on the areas of annexation, areas of interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel. I'll take a roll call of the commissioners. Commissioner Burns.
Commissioner Burns, sorry, Council, I didn't mean to yawn, but I couldn't agree more with what you just summarized. In fact, if we were going with land use designations, I'd probably be thinking in terms of open space for the Sundays Lane property. So it's good. We'll just wait and see how things go.
Commissioner Nanalis.
Commissioner Mills, no comment.
Commissioner Strawson.
Commissioner Strawson, no comment.
Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell, it blows my mind that the invention of the iPhone is like a benchmark, because mine had a cord on it and was stuck to the wall when I was a kid. Thanks for that.
And I don't have any comments either. So I think we're good with that one. Andrew, the next one is applicant withdrawn. Should we talk about this?
No, I don't believe it's necessary to talk about. The applicant withdrew their request, and they're not seeking further consideration.
Okay. Then the next one, the last one.
Yep. So the last proposal is 2022 Rosemont Avenue, owned by the Slagles. Its current land use is low density residential. Its current zoning is R4. They submitted a proposal for low density residential and general commercial. After considering this proposal, we did modify the land use map to be low density residential and neighborhood mixed use. I will pull that up right now so we can all get a better idea. So this is the property in question. It's a parcel here. Let's see if I can, not any better. Let me turn the parcel lines on. It's just a heavy layer, so I've tried to keep it off. So this parcel is, I'm outlining it with my cursor. It's adjacent to Rosemont Avenue. And so you'll see low density residential for the portion of the property that does not front Rosemont, and then you'll see a neighborhood mixed use classification for the property adjacent to Rosemont Avenue.
And the applicant was asking for the entire parcel?
No, ma'am.
He was asking for it to be split the way that you have done it then?
Yes, there's a stream on this property. Generally, the line would follow the stream. Again, this doesn't take into account floodplain, environmental factors, anything that would be considered during a development proposal. This is strictly, would this land use be appropriate at this location? And we believe the smaller scale neighborhood residential that serves the surrounding neighborhood would be appropriate.
Okay, thank you. So we'll turn it over to Kevin. Any comments?
So we've owned this for a few years now, and you know, the things that we love about it are just how unique it is. It's one of the last remaining farms in the city that's, you know, up till now has been used as a cow farm. We're currently just producing hay. But the fact that the vast majority of it is a floodplain makes it really unique in that it really can never be developed because you can't build houses in it. And it's the fact that it's low density residential means we have a single family home, 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath with a 21.5 acre yard, which is amazing. It's exactly what we wanted. And it's probably why we were able to buy it, because, you know, everyone scratched their heads at what to do with it. But having lived here now and having really tried to think, what could we do with it? What would be the best and highest use? We did recognize that that delineated part past the stream facing Rosemont Avenue represented a completely different and separate portion of the property. We don't really have, I have to go out there and mow and plow that 3.5 football field long section. So I have a connection to it, but otherwise it doesn't feel like it's a part of the overall property. There is a part of the floodplain in it, but there are a good 3 acres that front Rosemont that seem like they would have a lot of potential to do something more in line with commercial. We've gone around a whole different types of ideas, everything from an educational facility to sort of take in. We have plans to restore the wetlands and enhance the wetlands and a riparian zone around the stream. You know, some type of a center to do that. A farm store. We have hundreds and hundreds of cars that pass by here every day. So another service for the Whittier area and the Yellow Springs area. But it just seems to make a lot of sense to differentiate that as something other than residential. And we're happy it was taken into consideration, and thanks a lot. That's it.
And so you're supportive?
I'm supportive. I mean, it's the neighborhood mixed use is a new term for me. We were seeking general commercial. Right. I guess if you had a quick nutshell difference, but it doesn't seem like out of keeping with what we want. It doesn't seem like there's anything prohibitive. And we're not looking to, you know, do a giant, anything large or huge there. We're just looking for basically to be able to do something there. And it seems like that would allow a lot of opportunities. So I am in support, yes.
Okay. All right, let's take a roll call. Commissioner Burns.
Well, it's all very logical, thank you.
Commissioner Manalis.
No comment. Thank you.
Commissioner Strawson.
Commissioner Strawson, I have no comments.
Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell, because I believe in transparency, I do have to just mention that I was on the property, I think last week, talking with Mr. Sligo, but not about this particular case. We were talking about something completely unrelated. It is a beautiful farm, a lovely environment. But I did want just to put that on the record that we were speaking, but again, not about this particular case.
Okay. So I just want to ask a question, and I think I know the answer, but we've done we've looked at a lot of properties that have a mixed use zoning on it. And when it's a mixed use zoning, it needs a certain percentage of residential, commercial, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But land classification of mixed use, neighborhood mixed use, would not preclude this having only commercial. Is that correct?
That is correct. The idea is we get into the weeds during a small area plan process, and we would determine the community's desires at that time. The idea, and I could step back as far as Mr. Dean's or Mr. Smriga's comments, the ideas of these 5 different mixed use districts, it's not to say that they're all going to have a unique identity, and these districts, they're really the foundation of the future neighborhood, or 5-minute neighborhood, as Mr. Slagle put it. The idea is that you view these districts or designations holistically as part of the small area plan process, and they align with the small area plan map. So you have the TJ corridor as a small area plan area, and then you have the corridor mixed use, which is the spine of that map. So really, this is setting the foundation for that process. And mixed use is mixed use, and a lot of different users are going to be permitted in many of these districts.
Okay. So there's no more public on, but I will open it to the public that is on the phone. See how I do this. I think we'll just take a roll call down through the people who have already commented to see if there's any last comments that you all have. And then the numbers up here, 929-229-5669 is the phone number, conference ID 877-147-106#. So Andrew, any further comments?
No comment. Thank you all for your time.
And Bruce, any further comments?
No, thank you. It was a wonderful evening. Thanks.
Chris?
Good seeing you all. Till next time.
Okay, let's see. Kevin just spoke. Oh, yeah. Anything else, Kevin?
I just wanted to say, if in my original comments when I was giving my beautiful utopian vision for Frederick, I feel like I might have been a little bit smarmy and maybe took a pop shot at Bruce and Chris, and I want to rescind that in whole. I know how hard they work and how a part of what's made Frederick great, and I know everybody's always done their best here. So if any of what I said was negative, I really want to take that back. And I really do just believe in Frederick. We've chosen to live here after 20 years being gone, and I couldn't be happier with the choice. So that's it. Thank you guys so much for all your hard work.
Okay. And Noel?
Not at this time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. So that actually takes us through the agenda. I have a question, though, for Brandon, before you go to this upcoming schedule. You did... there's this whole text, the land use overview, and I know we're not going to, and it has all the policies, et cetera. So that's not even on the agenda today.
No, that was sort of provided as background information because the land use map is ancillary to that chapter. They go hand in hand. This map will be incorporated into that chapter. So just for convenience, I included it. There's very few revisions that have been made to that chapter. There's a few, but not many. So it was basically just supplied as convenience.
So are you saying that this chapter basically is the same text from last time?
January.
Oh, from January. Sorry, I got it. I thought I read this before. Okay. Now you've just connected all the dots, so thank you. Okay. All right. Can you put this on back up on a Google Doc? Just if there's any further comments. Okay.
Yes. It should be there for the most part.
It's still there?
It's still on Google Docs. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. All right. The floor is yours now.
Okay, so the next section is where do we go from here? This is the last special workshop that we've had. I would estimate probably close to 30 hours that we've spent analyzing this plan. I really appreciate all the time that you as Planning commissioners have volunteered for this effort. I'm proud to have worked on it this far with you and looking forward to where we go from here. I thank all the public input that we've received to this point. Now the ball's back in our court to where we get to make all the revisions and hopefully propose a nice, clean, tidy draft to the Planning Commission at a future workshop. I anticipate us being ready. I don't think we have enough time to get to the July workshop because I think that's only 10 working days to get that to you. I'm anticipating that we will get a clean version to you at the August 17th workshop. And we will be working very diligently to get this to you in a format that we believe hopefully wouldn't need further workshops and potentially a September public hearing for a recommendation to the mayor and board. With that being said, tonight there is some comments regarding the annexation policy that was proposed back in January. And after a lot of input from the development community and the Planning Commission and the state of our current affairs, we will be proposing a draft that removes that annexation policy. I believe that one of the goals of this comp plan this far, and I remember meeting with the Land Use Council way back in the fall, is for us to remain as flexible as possible for our entire community. And we believe as we move forward as a city to hold to that when it comes to annexation is very important. I think we're seeing a lot of changes in our nation. Day by day, there's news articles about changing land use patterns, and I think it would be, it's to our best interest to remove that policy at this point.
Okay, so I know. So let's go around for one more roll call. I feel like we've spent so many hours together. I'm going to miss this, but Commissioner Burns.
Yeah. A question, Brandon. When does the report go out for interagency comment? Like the state, county, is that after the draft, after the Planning Commission sees it one more time?
Yeah, so it's in between Planning Commission. We're hoping to submit it in the next couple weeks once we get this finalized. It's in between Planning Commission and before Mayor and Board consideration. So before we get, they need 60 days before the Mayor and Board consider it.
Thank you.
Commissioner Analysis.
Commissioner Manellis, no comment or question.
Commissioner Strawson.
Commissioner Strawson, I have no further questions.
Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell, I have to say kudos to the staff for amazing work, but also to my fellow commissioners. I have really enjoyed these workshops. They have been so thoughtful and so, I have to say, I was a little skeptical going in. We haven't done this for a long time, and this is a big thing to chew off, but I have been so pleased and impressed with the depth of conversation, the thoughtfulness that has been put into this. I think with all of this work, there's going to be a really good product to be taken to the Mayor and Board of Aldermen. So I just really wanted to appreciate you and the work that you have done as volunteers, many, many hours, not just the hours in discussion, but hours studying and thinking, and just trying to get to the best product possible. So thank you for that. That's all. Thank you.
And I'll just say that I've actually really enjoyed these evenings, and to be able to look at all of you, because who I'm looking at now are my fellow commissioners. I find that very engaging, and I feel very connected in these conversations. So this has been a wonderful forum. And also, I cannot believe, Mr. Mark, that you stand there for like 2 to 3 hours, and you have done a phenomenal job on the plan with us, shepherding it through. So thank you.
Thank you.
I guess that's it, guys. So have a great evening, and the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.